think perhaps we're all concerned deeply over the problems of the day. But perhaps we should take some consolation in the realization that we are here for the purpose of learning and growing, and not merely to have a good time. If it was a good time basis, it's been a dismal failure. In almost the most ancient periods of history, it's been nothing around but trouble. But trouble, it can be and is part of a system of great education. In some communities, the average school child does not enjoy going to class and will find every possible way of avoiding it. The same way the adult person does not wish to be burdened with the responsibilities and problems, it has finally become accustomed to accepting some of them. But whenever the condition or situation gets a little too complicated, its first thought is to move out from under it and let somebody else do the worry. Now, we have also set a very bad example. Some people say that history doesn't mean anything and that we don't need to look back upon the past to find what lies ahead. But in actual fact, history is tremendously important if we really dig into it and find out what it can mean to us now. History tells us the whole story. It tells us why we are what we are and how we got here, and what is the matter with what we are doing now. This is all fairly set forth because all these has happened many times. We are not the only civilization that has been in trouble. In fact, we cannot find one that has not been in trouble. And the troubles always nearly results from individuals breaking the simple rules of right living. As long as we break these relentlessly, we are going to be in the kind of difficulty as such. If we keep on breaking them long enough, our difficulties will increase. As long as we break these relentlessly, we are going to be in this kind of difficulty. If we keep on breaking them long enough, our difficulties will increase and will become perhaps in the end unbearable. We don't know, we hope not. Now, the problem of today is that the individual has always depended upon certain reports to make it possible to live a good life in a confused world. These reports have been idealism, the realization that there is a good reason for things and that there are hopes if we would deserve them. Idealism has always been that part of wisdom which compels us to self-improvement and the recognition that good rewards are the consequences of right conduct. The second problem that involves us today is atheism. Atheism is a very serious phase of materialism. On the level of industry, politics, and sociology, we are more or less materialist. On the cultural side of life and the religious side, there has been many great waves of atheism which has contributed to the present misery. If we live in this world from the cradle to the grave, with nothing to hope for except perhaps a little advance in salary, or running a business activity, and we know perfectly well that in due time we shall depart as all others have. If this becomes the basis of a way of life, we're very nearly bankrupt. Also, if in this philosophy of life that we have, we ignore religious factor, if we are content to deny divine principles as the source of life, if we are inclined to look upon ourselves as shipwrecked humanities on an island in space with no hope and nothing to dream about, if we take this attitude, we are also defeated. Defeated because we have nothing to live for if we have no reasonable code to live by. So we are very largely under the domination of a very stark materialism. This materialism has become the secret of the power of the way of survival. We live now only for material success. The only hope that we have now is either wealth or fame or some type of some materialistic advantage. We try to gain promotion, work for public office. We seek to be an executive. All for what? All as a way of filling the interval between the cradle to the grave. This particular type of career that we now consider to be all sufficient and a perfect evidence of progress is simply a dead end. There is nothing in it to inspire the person to do anything except try to get enough money to live comfortably or luxuriously. If he lives comfortably, he is dissatisfied. And if he lives luxuriously, he is self-destructive. There seems to be no way of getting away from the very simple fact that the individual without some vision or some purpose above the monotony of materialism, unless we can supply the individual with higher incentives, we're going to continue the way we are. The great sweep of atheism that has swept the world has come very largely from science. It was not originally a political problem. It is true they were atheists. They have always been atheists. But atheism was a philosophy, not a world power. Today, this philosophy, or nihilism, so to speak, has become a major factor in the lives of hundreds of millions of human beings. This particular atheism destroys the inducements or the incentives for ethics. It completely wrecks morality and destroys the individual's ability to transcend present conditions because of hope for better things to come. To take away from the individual something that is a strength to him, something that induces right action, that supports integrity and ethics, take these things away as meaningless and useless and insist that the individual will go down to sleep forever and no one will ever care what he does or what he has done. This is gradually undermining human civilization. It is destroying any purposeful reason for progress. Now we talk of nothing but progress, but to us, progress is nothing more or less but smarter and smarter computers. Progress is nothing but the advancement of the materialistic activities in which we are now engaged, and even amongst us, there is a very definite suspicion that this kind of progress is slowly fading away. That the progress which results in nothing but physical, economic complications is not an answer to the human need. We can get smarter and smarter computers, but if we have smaller and smaller people to run them, We will gradually come to the point where we will expect the computer to think for us, and this is going to be a disaster. Because there is no real way in which any individual can escape the responsibility to do his own thinking. Now we look at the human being to see what his potentials are. Here he is upon this desert island, surrounded by pressures, surrounded by competition and dishonesties, all kinds of unreasonable and irrational policies, and we say, what is he going to do about it? How is he going to live better in the world as he finds it? Well, from a very ancient time, human beings have contemplated these issues and have all come to a general agreement, namely that growth is an individual process. There is nothing that can prevent an individual from improving if he wants to. The question is, what will he pay for it? How will he so live that it will improve rather than merely increase the mass of public debt? To improve, the individual has to personally take over his own destiny. He has to do that which is in his own heart and conscience he knows right. And if he has no other conscious reply at the moment, he must find it. It is absolutely necessary that every individual become an idealist. It is necessary that he shall have a belief in immortality of his own soul and a victory of wisdom and love over ignorance and hate in this world. We must be willing, however, to recognize that there is a reality which is more important than wealth and fame. There is a destiny higher than the self-centered hedge fund manager or indeed a laboratory technician. When we begin to realize this, we get hold of some of these loose ends and do something about it. So today, we are looking for some foundation upon which we can build a survival technique, something we can depend upon. Now, when we begin this, we have to take a passing look at the experience. We have to figure out a little bit what's happening around us. We have to see about it. At the moment, we're having a very bad problem on drugs. We're having people making fortunes by distributing destruction, distress, and death. It has invaded education, and some of the worst examples of drugs will be found in the universities and the high schools down to the junior grades. It has interfered with our sports, which we used to consider to be a very healthy way of expressing natural energies. It is becoming a tremendous financial factor, making it possible for crime to buy practically everything it wants. And the average individual either is not addicted and therefore reads only as a viewer, or is already addicted and may not be willing to quit. With this situation, something is wrong behind the scene. It is to understand the forces and circumstances that make such things possible in the modern world. It is a simple statement of fact. Instead of being a progressive people, we are retrograding into savagery and barbarism. And what we call progress is nothing but mechanistic technicality. It is bringing us nothing. It is not making us a good homemaker. It is not guiding our children. It is not advancing our education. It has gradually reduced us to almost, we might say, to a new kind of slavery. Not the slavery of the ancients that we fought so hard to overcome. Not the slavery that Abraham Lincoln sought to correct in relationship with the Negro situation, but slavery to a possessing idea. Slavery to a way of life which exists primarily to assemble fortunes for a few and leave the rest completely incapable of living, understanding, and intelligent lives because there are no training it. If we want to give the world a real step forward, we have to use the institutions that we possess, reorient the institutions, set them in proper motion, and have them supply us with what we need. What we need is hope. What we need is faith. And what we also need is the general understanding of love in our relationships with life, with people, and the world in which we live. All these factors are being completely ignored. That is, as far as the advanced echelons are concerned. The individual that is still honest is regarded with certain amounts of pity. It is also doubted that he has a sound mentality. If he is happy, actually is probably captured in some kind of mania that gives him a nervous exhaustion without any intellectual or emotional progress. All these things are problems we have to face. So unless we're willing to face them, it is going to drift along, and each generation and each civilization will finally come to the dust as it always have in the past. We have to either take hold of situation, do something about them, and get over the absolute tyranny of wealth and power, and find out what makes the individual a proper human being. Among other noticeables, it is obvious that the present procedure, which is now generally approved, is causing more ill health than most people can afford. And the effort to regain that health is far more expensive than anyone could afford. We are simply paying a tremendous price for determining to live badly. And we will have to continue these also. But there is a simple way of getting a look at this. And unless we get a different look, we are going to be in trouble all the way along. Back in the 16th century and early 17th century, it was decided that there was a great need for house cleaning in the field of education. Up to that time in Europe, particularly, the educational facilities had been inadequate. In the 16th, 15th, and 14th century, Europe was probably one of the poorest countries in the world as far as education is concerned. There was no pattern for any definite system to help young people grow. They had to depend upon their elders, and most of the elders were uninformed and many were illiterate. So this problem brought to attention the need for a different schooling system, something to give children an education so that they could get on their feet, so they could correct the mistakes of some of the previous generation and build a better world in the course of years than the one they came into. This particular situation resulted in the first educators of the modern world. That primarily education had to be a structure built upon the foundation of ethics and dedicating to the true meaning of ethics. In education, it had to be something that made ideals more important. In education today, the great need is still for ideals. The educational system which carries the average person to the high school is deficient. Every educator knows that. And now some efforts are being made to correct at least part of it. Instead of young people going to school to learn, they go to school to form gangs and cliques and get on drugs at a tender age. This type of thing is partly due to the fact that the whole system of raising of young people is wrong. It is false, and it is simply a byproduct of the selfishness and slothfulness of some adults, and also, of course, the lack of vision of the social structure. So if the schools started in by simply pointing out the beginning of a good career was ethics, and proved conclusively that the real reason for science is not to build artificial intelligence or push ships in space. The real reason for science is to help every individual to understand himself. And through the understanding of himself, to build a better life. Because science proves that this understanding is true. The real reason and purpose for science is that it shall build a solid foundation under the hopes of the race and not settle for problems of competitive exploitation. Reason for science is that it should show us how to live, and to show us how to live does not require years and lives of vast research. Because when the vast research is all finished, man is still born, man suffers, and man dies. Therefore, the purpose of a living science is to come in and help to build a foundation on the dreams, to make it obvious and provable, and they could, if they wanted to, that there are rules in life, perfectly scientific, that if kept would bring the human being into a security he has never known, and if broken will leave him where he is. So science has to become idyllic. Education has to idealize. It has to point values above wealth. It has to put integrities above so-called success. And it must teach young people that they are not born to do exactly what they please. They are born to do as they should. There are rules governing life. If those rules are broken long enough, we can't build enough prisons and penitentiaries. If we get these thoughts a little clear in our mind, then we can get into another aspect of the situation, namely labor. Work is work no matter how you figure it. But work is also very useful. Work is the only value that most people can actually develop. It is the only thing the individual has to do, whether he likes it or not. Work is a routine, a regimentation, and a regular use of energy. The individual has this much discipline when he has a job and he wants to keep it. Now, this discipline is variously adulterated by the corruption that exists throughout the world of employment. But the fact remains that employment is necessary. It is the only way that we have of keeping millions of people from spending the entire day on their smartphones. If they have to go off to work, at least, there is a little interlude of something else. The entire problem of work then is discipline. It is built upon one of the first laws of nature, namely, if you don't work, you can't eat. Now, this is pretty obvious, and even with the wonderful generosity of governments, there is something to be said for the fact that just plain human dignity requires labor. We have to do things to earn things, to have things. If we get them other way or otherwise, we are dishonest. So labor has to get into the realization that there is a reason for work. It has been noticed in many occasions among the Japanese people. This seems to be more or less evident. As far as the 1920s in Japan, the Nippon Ginko, the great Japanese bank, or Nichigen for short, was a very precious and very important economic institution. However it was run in the background is not the subject of this matter, but it has a long and successful reputation among persons from the best integrities. But the primary purpose of the Nippon Ginko was to employ as many persons as possible on a job. In other words, if you had 10 cousins, they should all work. If you were in the position to employ them or see that they were employed, you should help to do it. No one should receive help who does not work. And in the case of the Nippon Ginko, it was done by passing a check to about 10 hands before it was cashed, and each one putting a seal on it. This was a way of keeping people eating. And this keeping them eating was not a government subsidy. It was that those who have powerful institutions made sure that as many people as possible got work in their institutions. The present motion is exactly the opposite here. The problem is forever to have fewer people are turning into machines. And now common in the most organization, it is the customer who takes care of himself and the management takes the profit. We do not even serve people anymore in many forms of business. They take care of themselves. They put the fuel in the car themselves. They use the self-service machines to check out in the grocery shops themselves. Everything is going back to the individual because it is cheaper. This type of thing is low ethical level that we have to do a great thinking about, because these things all add up to something. It is contrary to our doctrine and beliefs here to bring politics into the picture. But I think we can all realize that the political situation is involved in the same problems. It has its own internal difficulties, and it is working upon a public that does not know how to cooperate with what not to cooperate with. So everything goes along a level of ignorance, uncertainty, confusion, discord, and conflict. All these factors are still another level of life. The home is another institution that is suffering keenly from the attitudes of the time. Gradually, the home, which was the foundation of civilization, is becoming merely a kind of boarding house. It is no longer a significant place where a family unit works together for a common good. It is no longer a unit that is supported by happiness, that is happy to do the things that it's doing. It is now doing what it has to do in order to survive. And survival now means, for the average person, a high level of luxury. Then we go into the religious fields. One of the old Kabbalists made a very famous remark on this count. He said, there are 17 names of God, but only one God. This is a very great thought-provoking statement. Here we have a world of religion which had been locked in discord since the beginning of history. It is a mass of believers, all with almost identical beliefs, but doing everything they can possibly do to prevent working together. This is one of the great problems. Religion is failing the individual, and those that are in the lower brackets of education are particularly affected, because religion to the poverty-stricken was the elixir of life. It was the one great hope. It was beauty in sordidness. It was wonder in pain. And it was survival because of the strength of the inner conviction. This is also being taken away. Little by little, the simple facts of religious unity that would save the world hundreds of billions of dollars every year is still impossible or remote or indeed not probable. We are still divided in worship, and its division will come up on another situation. It is a matter in which all religion but ours are less than ours, and therefore there is no appreciation or working with a deep understanding of the spiritual unities of life. One of the great proofs we should have of religion is that we work together, and that all religions rejoice in the works of each other, and do not spend most of their time trying to run down their competitors. All the religious situation is poor. Then we go into health. Health situation is also very inadequate. Health is becoming more expensive every day and less certain. And with all the excitements that has gone on here in the last 100 years, particularly, the statistics prove that all we've been able to actually accomplish is to provide the probability that the average person will live a year or two longer than he would if he had not been for science. This particular achievement, however, is costing incredible sums of money, with no certainty of success. Health is not attained because the average person doesn't want it. He wants what he wants. If he wants to eat himself into an early grave, he considers this is right and privilege. Instead of following the classical concept that right is the basis of all value, the individual places his own appetite as the main criterion in problems of living. Now, we could go on with this for almost infinity, but the points involved are simple and not too difficult. It all sums up in one basic statement, namely that we cannot depend on the world around us to get us out of this mess. The only way we're going to get out of this is to understand more of the world within us. It is the world that is invisible to sight. It is a world of those eternal powers and lights and lies which nature has given us examples. We are individuals given a mind and faculties, given opportunities, given privileges, and having received a beautiful garden to live in which we are gradually and inevitably desecrating. We are the source of the whole thing. Now, someone would absolutely no doubt bring up the question, how can one person stand against this? How can one person live well in a world in the present state of affairs? Well, it's not as difficult as we are inclined to think. In the first place, the average individual is not as important to other people as they think he is. What he does is not mindful to them as long as it doesn't annoy them. Therefore, if he wishes to live a little better, the majority of humanity will not even notice it. He can have his own code of life, at least in the Western world, with a reasonable probability of being able to live it without unreasonable complications. It is not necessary for the individual to conceal his integrities. What is necessary for him to do is to develop them so that they are functioning in his own life. There is no earthly reason why any individual has to become a drug addict simply because there are millions of them floating around the country. It does not have to follow the poorest and the weakest if it must have a peer group. It does not need to do any of these things with which his life has been burdened. All these problems does not become necessary for him to be an activist or terrorist. It is not necessary for him to be the richest man in the planet. All of these different excesses, whatever they are matters of personal choice. And in every case, a bad choice ends in an unhappy life. The individual has to finally cope with something that no scientist has been able to discover. And that is the source of the small, still voice inside of himself. The individual has conscience. The individual has within himself a realization, maybe faint, but it's there, of values, a realization that he is a person capable of a life, capable of having important contributions to make to society. He is a person who has perhaps a rather limited but inevitable individual sphere of influence. It is perfectly possible for the man to be a good father, and it is perfectly possible for the woman to be a good mother. The only problem in all these things is the temptation to escape responsibility in the fulfillment of pleasant purposes, so-called, and yet these pleasant purposes all fall apart if they are not genuine and right. All around us are people getting themselves into trouble every day trying to be happy. There are also others that are troubled already every day and are trying to get out of it. All these sum up to a very funny style of affair in which the world slowly looks more and more like a lunatic asylum, in which ordinary common sense, honesty, judgment, and integrity simply disappear. They fade out in favor of things that have no value whatsoever. Most of the ancients have left us with a very conscious thought that claim or proclaim is of very little value. The individual can claim anything he wants to claim, but his conduct and his life are affected only by what he does. The individual may claim anything, and this is one of the problems that afflicts religion. Over a long period of time, it has become obvious that most religious people believe in God. Most religious people have an ability to quote scripture. They are also well-meaning, good-natured people, but they have not cultivated the inner spirit of a faith. They haven't gotten far enough to forgive a friend or relative for some real or imaginary injustice. They haven't gotten far enough to stop regretting the past and building towards the future. They have not forgot to gossip. They have not found also a solution to what they call righteous indignation, of which there is no such thing. All of these problems show that somewhere religion has become words but not works. And the same is being true of law. The codes of countries, the Declaration of Independence, the Magna Carta, the Justinian Code, these have been codes which have been generally accepted, but there is hardly one of these codes that have not been violated almost before the ink was dry. All of the good things of life are accepted as real, but it is assumed that somebody else is going to leave them, not ourselves. We want to do what we want to do. And as some do say, so help me God, I'm going to. This is the problem at the moment. This is the thing we have tried to do something about. Our greater resources are too. The trouble we're in is one of the resources of improvement. The other resource is the eternal capacity to grow. There is a way by which any need that we recognize can be achieved in ourselves. There is within our power to think straight. And while that thought may not be necessarily highly scientific or highly economic, the thought can be and is sufficient to our need if we will use it. There is no reason why anyone in this world should not know the differences between right and wrong. The difference between right and wrong, however, is modified by selfishness, stupidity, and even terrorism. We are not willing to live up to what we really believe and know to be right. Because of that, we are always in trouble. Now, as we go into another phase in this world, we see more and more evidence that it is frightening. Now, to be frightened, an individual must have something to fear, and fears the wrong thing. Instead of fearing world wars and the nuclear vision, or indeed another variant of the pandemic, he should fear his own inability to conduct himself with proper consciousness in the daily events of living. The fear of the person to become uncontrollable has brought many unfortunate situations. The most destructive emotions in the universe is fear. Fear is the greatest killer that we know. Fear can stop your heart as quick as a bullet. Fear can stop any function of the body, the emotions, or the mind. Fear or terror can accomplish the most damage on the body of a human being than the release of a hydrogen bomb. Fear, as the ancients all pointed out, is that emotion which creates a relation of negation by means of which the individual is open to everything that is bad, everything that is weak, everything that is wrong. There is nothing that can create a criminal more rapidly than fear, even though he may be full of bravado about it. There is nothing more that can compromise our ethics any more rapidly than fear. There is nothing that can destroy our integration and our orientation in life more rapidly than fear. And according to psychics who have explored the invisible constitutions of man, fear destroys all natural defense mechanisms of the magnetic fields against the possibilities of obsession, the possibilities of infection by bacterial organisms, or the possibility of contagion. And these fear motives also destroy the power of the body to take in energy by closing and compressing the various channels through which vitality can reach the body. Therefore, fear completely elevates in time. It leads to all kinds of desperate actions and usually causes the individual to multiply his karma manifold very quickly. If therefore a person is fearful, he becomes wide open to every negative factor of life, the universe around him, and the pressures of his own personality within him. Fear loathes his defenses and his resistance, and when anything becomes the object of fear, the individual who is frightened is defeated, then and there. Consequently, fear will help to intensify any type of psychotic situation. As surely as fear is the great destroyer, faith is the universal medicine. So fear is the poison and faith is the remedy for nearly every situation that can arise. We simply are unable to be ourselves. Yet, if we believe any of the major religion and philosophies of the world that are worth believing, we will realize that the individual is always the master of his own destiny. Regardless of what he goes through, regardless of his responsibilities or the things that are happening, the individual is himself and can be himself. The trouble is, he is himself now, but isn't good enough. He's got to improve these relationships, build a more complete and fulfilling destiny for his own kind. Man is the highest species of life that we know, and that is visible to our common understanding, and he should be doing better than he is. It should be capable of leading the person into proper fields of activity. It should enable the individual to say honestly that this is not what I would prefer to do, but this is what is best for me, and do it. We have all kinds of opportunities, and I think the main thing we have to do is to take on something as though we were taking a job or a dope addiction. The way we are living is more or less in a state of constant addiction. Addiction to things that are useless, worthless, and destructive. We think we're doing pretty well, and many people are doing better than we know. But unfortunately, they are not given recognition because the opinion makers are not the ones that are doing the best work. The opinion makers are trying desperately to perpetuate chaos instead of finding a cure for it. And for this particular reason, we cannot expect to be appreciated for what we do. Another problem is one of rewards. Let us imagine for a minute that we do try to think it through and see what is best for all concerned. We can't help but say to ourselves, if I'm living better, will I be happier? Well, the chances are you will be. But this is not the primary condition. You are living better because you must. Because there is no way of escaping it without tremendous loss in values to yourself and your world. It isn't whether it's more profitable, it's rather if it's necessary for survival. And if there is no survival, all profits become a delusion. So when we start with something that is more or less religious and philosophical, we want to live the best we can in this particular environment. I think we should therefore all have somewhere in our own natures certain decisions. Whether we can live up to them perfectly or not is not the point. We should each of us realize that we can improve, that we can grow, that we can develop these virtues which makes us better for ourselves and more useful and helpful to others. There is some way in which we can do better. And having decided that there is such a way, we can begin to consider how to achieve it. How to do better. Sometimes it's merely to sit down and think things through. Perhaps we were all brought up in a better code that we are practicing today. If so, then we have to remember that which was good. We have to remember the virtues of our ancestors instead of justifying ourselves by carefully remembering their vices. It is a matter of selecting as far as we can that which is the best part of our own inner life. Having put these as near as we can into some kind of pattern, then what are we going to do to improve it? How are we going to learn and grow? One thing we have to realize is that in the world of work, leisure time is the best suited for personal improvement. It is very difficult to do an hard day's work and at the same time fulfill all impulses and ideals of the inner life. On the other hand, we have a large part of our lives to ourselves. We have hours every day which we do not work. Most people have at least 2 days a week which they are not regularly employed. Time that is leisure is the time we can best use for the cultivation of our own internal lives. It is in leisure that we have time to think. And it's our desperate effort to escape thinking that has prevented some development within our own nature up till now. We do not need to watch second-grade television show the moment we get out of a business situation. We can have leisure enough to think. And in this leisure, we can cultivate some type of understanding of knowledge superior to what we have now. In leisure, we can read good books. In leisure, we can develop habits and talents and abilities that are latent within ourselves. In leisure, we can come to understand our friends better. In leisure, we have more opportunities to share in the lives of our children. We cannot afford at this time to simply use leisure as an escape from labor. This is something we can no longer afford to do. Leisure must be useful. It does not want the dull or melancholy or sad or gloomy dispositions towards life. But it must be a little bit serious. It must be serious at the same time, perpetuating a sense of humor without which all fails. We need, however, a certain amount of time to grow. And that time is for us leisure. There are two periods of growth besides leisure. One is childhood, when, however, we have not yet the need of responsibilities. Then there is retirement, in which we have left the heavy labor of life and wish to do nothing as long as possible, or at least we are no longer strong enough in our thinking to want to work real hard. We want to forget the problems that are burdening us. We want to relax and rest. Well, rest is wonderful, but rest is also leisure, and no one can really rest doing nothing. To just sit and look at the ceiling is not real rest. So most people have something to do when they're resting. But is it something that they really should be doing? Or is it simply wasting time? Is it wasting these things we have so much to be grateful for? This thing that gives us the opportunity to grow every minute to the very moment of decease. No matter how old we are, we can grow some way, do something that is of value, or contemplate our own lives in terms of estimating value, using our own career as a textbook, which will help us to understand life. So that leisure is something that we should very definitely never waste. Now, relaxation is very good. We all need to relax. But leisure is relaxation if it is properly used. Leisure and relaxation are one thing, because if we try to use leisure for attention and get worked over something, it isn't leisure anymore. So we have several hours a day, maybe a number of days a year, and some years of life in which we can contemplate the realities and values. We can make new assessments of the reasons for our own existence. We can begin to develop various overtones. Now we have, of course, two possible inducements for these. One is to grow and the other is to gain profit. Many people use leisure time to create new business organization, or to manufacture products, or to become involved in some type of profitable occupation. Leisure time is therefore sometimes merely dedicated to economic improvement. Unless this is absolutely necessary to survival, I don't think it should be cultivated. Leisure is a time in which we can live with God and ourselves. Leisure is an opportunity to search for value. And if we are not impelled to search for value, then we must develop that gift. Otherwise, we should be part of that worldwide spread of failures upon which we are so reluctant to give attention. Actually, therefore, leisure is a good thing, and it gives us a lot of opportunity. Nearly everyone has values. Now consider, for instance, that the human being is over 40 with potential specializations of values within himself. There are at least 40 different possibilities for a career, for growth, for improvement, for fulfillment, and for instruction. These 40 faculties may not all be developed in any particular embodiment, nor should they need to be. But as the writer so well pointed out over 200 years ago, that it is a shame for an individual who has 40 capacities to live and die with use of only 3 or 4 or 5. But this is what is happening. If the technician on the computer uses 3 or 4 faculties and depends upon his own life for the rest, and because he is an expert on the computer, his own life may be pretty much neglected anyway. But it is not good for a person to have only one tremendous dedication, nearly always for profit, fame, or something of this nature. Leisure should be used as a cultural instrument. We are expected to divide the day into labor, leisure, and rest. In Anglo-Saxon England, Alfred the Great found the time to invent the candle clock. According to the 12th century chronicler William of Malmesbury, Alfred so divided the 24 hours of the day and night as to employ 8 of them in writing, in reading, and in prayer, 8 in the refreshment of his body, and 8 in dispatching the business of the realm. There was in his chapel a candle consisting of 24 divisions, and an attendant whose peculiar province it was to admonish the king of his several duties by its consumption. By this plan, therefore, those 6 candles burnt for 24 hours, a night, and a day without fail. We have therefore the leisure to meet with others, to think with them, to enjoy communion with good things, to study, to travel, to have all kinds of useful opportunities. But if these all fail, if there is no recognition of usefulness within the individual himself, if none of these things mean anything to him, and all that is important is a bottle of whiskey in front of the television, is not going to achieve very much. And his failure is a miniature of the world's failure. It's just a microcosm of the world's condition. It's doing exactly what is causing the trouble for all humanity. He is suffering for them. He is suffering also because he is like them. So these requires further emphasis. Out of leisure comes the possibility of a little deeper approach to life. Leisure gives opportunity for the cultivation of our music, literature, and religion. Leisure gives the individual the opportunity to contemplate and meditate upon the great values of living. It enables him to become aware of the nobility of those who have gone before, of the sacrifices they have made for the perpetuation of human culture. So all kinds of leisure lifts the individual up a little. They lift him up to a new sense of his own identity. He suddenly becomes aware that he can think, that he can learn, and that his life does not have to be a wheel in a squirrel's cage. That he can have personal existence, even though he lives in a world of monotonous identification of work. Actually, therefore, the beginning of a whole problem is that the person should realize he can grow, realize he has the opportunity to grow, and develop the intensity which will make him make the most of the opportunity. It is perfectly possible for each person to become very much wiser and better than he believes he could be. The greatest wisdom in this world comes not out of formal schooling, but out of the careful consideration and thoughtfulness concerning the experiences of life, and also an observation of the environment in which he lives. Any individual, therefore, who does what is wrong, or hurts, or injures, must live for a time for that which he injures, whereas the injured thing nearly always escapes. This is another interesting fact in the study of life's problems. So the person must kindly come to the conclusion that there are two paths which he can follow, one of which is the fulfillment of appetite and desire, and the other is perfection of character. Religion finally leads the person to become a citizen in a larger universe, and this larger universe is here now. It is a mistake to assume that we are just one people dedicated to wealth and competition. There is already a world of beauty right here. There is a world of friendship right here. And if we become a friend, we will have a friend. If we begin to live on a higher level of thinking or acting, we will discover that there are others on this level also, that it is not necessary to think that we are all alone in a wicked world. There are others like ourselves, and the moment we become like them, we recognize them. And the way to know the better is to know how to realize the better. And how to do that is to simply become better ourselves. So if we lift ourselves up, we will not land in a vacuum. We will land in a company of considerable body of dedicated people who want to do the best they can to become good people, and wise people, and loving people who have overcome at least some of the physical limitations which have become the plague of our civilization. So the possibility of growing is not to move into isolation. It means to move into higher stratum of the world's culture and find that there are many who can help us and whom we can help. This is part of life. Another point that we have to take into consideration: wherever there is a great mystery, there is a job. Wherever a world is in great trouble, the thoughtful person must be trying to help. No one can afford to stand by and do nothing while others suffer. And while each person may have a different capacity to assist, there must be something. There must be at least a wonderful and cheerful and thoughtful prayer for those in trouble. There must be some expression of concern for that which have not achieved integrity. There must be something for those who are still struggling to meet the common problems of living. And this is only possible if those who will try to help them have already attained some proficiency in these matters themselves. They may not have done everything that is necessary, but they are working in the right direction. So all along, we have a kind of realization that is summarized in classical and even the better modern idealism, and that is that we live in a world that is basically and essentially spiritual. We live in a world in which a divine power is the dominant at all things. We therefore know that this divine power is good and that this divine power is not there to destroy us. It is not a constant punishing agent. The idea that we are here to suffer is not due to our cause or due to the power that created us. It is due to our own lack of willingness to accept the responsibility of proper living. This universe is a magnificent, wonderful thing, and every one of us must ultimately become a graduate from the Universal Academy. We must all, in the due course of time, go through the grades, finish the curriculum, and become graduates. We must all become, in a sense, alumni of the University of Hard Knocks, which is one of the biggest institutions in the world and one of the most valuable. So with these concepts, that we are not here to suffer, we are here to find out what causes suffering and correct it. We are not here to rebel against the infamies of our kind. We're here to grow strong enough and wise enough to help other people to also develop their internal potentials. And if the problem of suffering comes along, we are here, if we are wise people, to decide that it is better to suffer ourselves than to pass suffering onto others. That in every instance, the wiser that the person is, the better it can control his own fortunes and misfortunes. It is no longer necessary for him to lean helplessly upon others no wiser than himself. If he looks through his assessments of values, he can find out where his courage lies, where his hopes are, where his faculties support him. And if he finds that these things are not good enough, then he must impose upon himself a self-designed curriculum. The young person who wants to graduate from the university has to go to school. And actually, our present life is the University of Hard Knocks, in which we all have to graduate. And the universe has provided us this for one reason only. Until we achieve these within ourselves, our divine natures cannot be perfected. We cannot grow unless we become more aware of the meaning of life. And the meaning of life is growth and sharing and serving. And the great powers of life are to love, to think, and to serve. These are the things that we must all bear in mind and understand. And most people who have read a book or two on these subjects, and those who are thoughtful people, have more or less this dedication already. In fact, a very few people who have not read the New Testament or some part of scripture of some religion without realizing that they are in the presence of a doctrine of forgiveness and love and of fellowship. That we are actually, as the Sufis said, destined to be friends of God. God is our elder brother, a great friend, and our hope. God also is a being that has no need in itself. But the need that appears to have are the needs that we have for each other, and which we assume to be of divine origin, when the needs are nothing but the accumulation of the misfortune with which we are plagued one another down through the ages. It is not deity that plagues, or burdens, or punishes. It is the deed itself which, if wrong, has to be corrected. Now, this is only the way in which the individual can be educated. Here we have nearly 7 billion people, perhaps a few more, scattered over the firmaments of the earth. It is impossible for any system of knowledge that we know, or the university, to be large enough to educate them all. And even more difficult because of language, or of race, of interests, locality, environment, and heredity. All of these things have to be taken into consideration. So it is impossible to create a school great enough to teach everybody. And of course, if one tries, there will be an immediate warfare and conflict and a great turmoil with everyone mad at everyone else. Therefore, it can be done that way, the way it is. Instead of having one school for all these people, what we have is one need which each of these individuals must experience in himself. Each individual is in the same trouble. Therefore, whether he knows it or not, each individual must find his way out from the same path. There is only one path, and that is through self-discipline and dedication. And there is no other way of working it out. The only way is the person himself enters the private university of his own memories, of his own thoughts, and of his own beliefs, and of his own environment. He sees the broken home. He sees the delinquent child. He wonders about his own mistakes and how, of all these, he develops a curriculum. The only way the world can be educated is each person should take the responsibility for his own enlightenment. And if he does this, things get much better and life becomes much more endurable for himself and everyone else. If we want to start on a more or less simple basis, just look at your own life. Looking through back at the beginning. Actually, many people looking through their lives are thought they had gone on pretty well. Others wish to forget it as quickly as possible. The ones who wants to forget it are the ones who should remember it, because they are the ones who have unfinished business. There is an unfinished business as long as we cannot look upon life with quietude and peace. There is unfinished business if all we can remember is hurts. There is unfinished business as long as we hope to revenge ourselves for something real or unreal. There is also something wrong if our sorrows are involved in things that are not important. If our lives have been destroyed by loss of money, we're in pretty sick condition. All of these things we have to wait, by going back and seeing just what we were and what we were doing. Going back as early as memory permits, we try to figure out our relationship with our parents, our relationship with our brothers and sisters, and gradually as we grow older, relationships with teachers and friends, educators, and finally into marriage, now relationship with a spouse and children. All these things are pictures. And there are many people who will say that if they could do it again, they would do it differently. This is the most magnificent discovery they have made. But having decided if they were to do it again, they would do it differently, they overlook the fact that they are still doing it again right there and then. Therefore, they can do it differently, immediately if they so desire. It is perfectly possible to benefit by past experiences at almost any day of living. Most of all, people will begin to discover that a great deal of sorrow was unnecessary, that they regret the things that should have been overlooked or forgotten in the beginning. Sorrow over many things is unnecessary, and most of it is useless. We have to realize that sorrow is a human reaction, which we will keep. It will be there. But also in every case, it will gradually be made into a beautiful memory of some kind. It will be remembered for the truth, the beauty, the wisdom, and the love in it. But the incident itself will fade out. Always along the way, therefore, we have the tremendous demand to change ourselves, to grow up, to make new use of the faculties that we possess. And we do it by using the textbook that has been given to us. As one great alchemist once said, God has given man 3 textbooks upon which to base wisdom. The first is the Holy Writ. The second is nature. And the third is himself. These are the 3 great books which each one of us must learn to read. It is not possible for us to read the book of God directly. Therefore, we have to read it through scriptures. And these scriptures are the records of sanctified, thoughtful, dedicated persons who have had the highest and most noble motives we know of in humanity. The second, of course, is nature. That was how Luxi became a great philosopher, sitting by the side of the hill and looking out upon the beauties and wonders of the world, and he saw nature unfolding. We can do that today. But the moment we do this, we find out something that perhaps Luxi could only intuit. We find out nature is a fulfillment of rules, that nature in its own way is constructive, beautiful, and fulfilling, that everything that is necessary is there. Every instinct in the animal world is towards survival, security, and the fulfillment of the laws of the kind, whatever they may be. The human being, with his own book, has all kinds of texts to study. He knows what attitude makes him sick. He knows how worry is giving him a stroke. He knows how poor nutrition has endangered his heart. He knows all the physical rules that he should live by. He knows that while he may not wish to be a diet victim, that he will have to be a student of physical nutrition if he wishes to have the maximum efficiency during the years of his life. If he does not do this, then he will have to face the difficulties of his own neglect of the rules of proper conduct. Then, of course, not quite so visible is his inner life. But while it is true that he will accept the certain things to eat that will make him sick, is never willing to recognize and understand that certain feelings make him sick, that certain attitudes make him sick, and that he will continue to wreck the physical by using and misusing the powers of metaphysical adversely. Also, then, one could find that the individual may have a sick mind. This doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be institutionalized as a mental patient. A person has a sick mind who is devoted to fear, greed, and unpleasantness, who is highly competitive, who is critical to those around him, all that type of thing. If he is always on edge, if his temper is uncontrollable, if he is nuisance to other people, it will be a danger to himself. This is another one of the facts of life we all have to learn. But because he has a mind that can make him sick, and it doesn't have the physical pain or physical illness, it pays no attention to the mind. It just considers that it is quite possible for him to be unpleasant if he feels like it. If other people are, why shouldn't he be? So other people's mistakes become justification for our own, and this itself is 100% erroneous. But actually, the individual has these forms of other illness which arise from misuse of faculties. The brain, for example, is a rather handsome little fellow, if you can find him. The brain is really nice too, but can in fact become a spoiled child in keeping. The mind can be all things, but the mind is also there if used well. It supports the emotions and protects the body. If used badly, it destroys itself and destroys the emotions and body with it. The mind, therefore, being the sole superintendent and supervisor of our personal lives, should be brought into proper order. It must be educated, not in abstract sciences, but educated in the problem of daily living. It must be a counsel of prudence that can always be called upon in time of need. It must be the most perfectly useful of all psychoanalysts. It is also a great possibility in the field of psychotherapy. The mind must keep us healthy, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And if it isn't healthy and it's not able to do it, then we are in trouble and we go out and try to pay other people to do it for us, and as a result, we lose money. But we do not cure the trouble. So the mind is part of our lives. It's part that requires discipline. It is something that we have to improve. We have to get a mind that is fair, honest, gentle, lovable, and kindly. All these things, and the mind must also be addicted to common sense. It must be able to look at things that happen and see why things happen and accept it. We use the mind now largely to create excuses for our own misbehaviors. We find it easier to try to rationalize our way out of problems than to solve it. This is again not solutional. With a little work, we can find that we can live today in this world as it is, with a full realization that we are here for a reason. And if we didn't deserve to be here, we wouldn't be here. And that we will continue to suffer various inconveniences and emergencies until we make the necessary corrections in ourselves. If when the course of time, therefore, it becomes evident that we are not going to be able to maintain a high standard of physical existence, the time will come, and even the most optimistic person admits that the forest is going to give out, the water supply is short, that all these minerals in the earth are being depleted, and someday we'll have no more gasoline. All of these things cannot be solved by the blind hope that science will find a substitute. Things will improve only when the individual begins to conserve resources, when it doesn't waste them anymore, when it does everything possible to protect the well-being of all in society, that it does nothing that will deprive others of their rightful paths in the faculties and problems of life. If he can get to this point of view, he will then find that his energies and resources will extend considerably further than they do now. We have to learn to live together and work. We have to learn to be patient with the mistakes of each other. And we must learn to step in and take care of a job if someone else cannot do it. These type of thoughts begin to develop a modern, moral person. Then we can safely say that progress has meant something to us. Not because we sat on the top of it, but because we realized how poor it was and did something about it. Progress is not the advancement of the status quo, though there be many that fall upon the right hand and many upon the left hand. The just person cannot be moved. The just individual is not thinking of the small span of his present life, but by establishing his integrities, those forced into the unknown with a better hope. The more we are able to live well here, the greater reason we have to hope that we will be properly cared for after we depart. As long as we are willing to pass over into another life without any preparation and thoughtfulness and virtue, with some orthodox people believing that we are going to God without any of our mistakes corrected, waiting for the bounty of heaven to cure us, this, I think, is going to prove a disappointment. It should be a disappointment. In fact, it is the only disappointment. Now, if that happens for any chance, we are not going to be eternally punished. We're just going to be reminded that we played hooky and that we very carefully avoided the lessons that we were supposed to learn. And when a child insists on avoiding the lessons that are supposed to be learned or necessary to him, there is one answer: send him back to school. And if the situation gets hold and we get out of this world without doing something about it, we'll be back. And we will be back to correct the same faults and mistakes. We're not going to have new faults unless we get a few new ones, and very few that we haven't tried already. But we will find that if we don't do something now, we'll have no hope of getting any better. And I think this is a more useful attitude than the materialistic attitude of science that we begin with a drop of life and end as a biological concept at the end of it all. That there is nothing beyond or before. Whereas the fact is that there were much before, and that's why we are here. And there is much beyond. But whatever it is, the sooner we learn to think straight, the more pleasure and helpful and useful life will seem. And we will be able to achieve, the better we live now, the better our destiny forever. We'll never have to face the same problem twice, because the moment it is solved, it is no problem. And if we keep on solving old problems and not making new ones, one of these days we are going to come out even with the laws that govern the universe. And we are going to discover that we live in the best world we'll ever know. The most just creation that we can imagine, under the most benevolent powers that can be conceived of by the most abstract theologians. All is well as far as it goes, but at the moment, we are not going far enough. Therefore, we have to do a little better. In the meantime, we hold good thoughts for each other and preserve our dedication to the divine power that rules all things. Time's up. Thank you very much.